Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Streamed and Screened, an entertainment podcast about movies and TV from Lee Enterprises. I'm Terry Lipshetz, managing editor of the National Newsroom at Lee, and co-host of the program with Bruce Miller, editor of the Sioux City Journal and a longtime entertainment reporter. You've been around so long, you remember when SNL debuted. I mean, I wasn't even around yet. Episode 1 was about 2 months before I was born.
I watched the first episode. And that means I was old enough to be able to stay up that late to watch the first episode.
That's right.
Now, that's pretty bad. And, I was at one of the early years. Bill Murray was on the show then, so Chevy had left. But I had gone to see the live broadcast of the show. And it was interesting to be there and to see how little you got to see when you were sitting in the seats, because you could only see the things that were across from you or on that main home base that they call. If it was right below you, good luck. It was nothing.
Yeah.
So, I remember the early years, and there was a little clip in the special where it showed Gilda and Steve Martin dancing around the audience, and I was there for that night. So
I remember you telling that story, and I was looking for you in that snippet. You know, it was interesting because I watched the movie Saturday night a couple of weeks ago. One of the things that surprised me a little bit was how the studio looked in there, because it looked a little unfamiliar. And then this past week, instead of just showing a rerun from the current, season 50, they showed on Saturday night a repeat of season 1, episode 1, the premiere episode. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. Let me check this out, because I've seen sketches here and there, but I had never actually watched the full episode front to back. And what I thought was interesting about it was that, the Saturday night really did capture the look and feel of the studio. The studio then, I don't know if they moved studios or if they reconfigured it and took out some of the seats, but it was really packed in there. I mean, they had a lot of seating in there.
Well, and if you noticed on the anniversary special, they basically did everything on that one stage. So It was a matter of just moving it in and out. But normally they're all located underneath the top tier of things. There are set pieces. And so it kind of rings the whole stage, so that really those seats that are in the front when you open the show, they disappear.
They clearly reconfigured things a bit to add more seating, to have more VIPs there. I mean, other than, of course, John Lovitz, who had to watch from the American Girl shop, but it was fun to see how they added in a lot more seating, and they made it a fuller experience. But it was interesting watching that premiere episode from season 1 and seeing how much the show has changed over the years, but how much of it is still kind of there. Like, they had the cold open, they sort of had the monologue. They didn't have a true opening monologue, George Carlin. They kept coming back multiple times and did stand-up set broken into 4 or 5 segments. You had your skits, you had your weekend update, you had your musical. Yeah, 2 musical guests, right?
And then they had another comedian come on and do a little stand-up that I think bombed.
Yeah.
I thought the Muppets were bad.
Yep.
And I thought they were bad when they came on the first time. I thought they really had no point. The other thing I noticed about the skits is that they were very short. They didn't have a long extended thing where, like, they're playing a game or they're doing whatever now. It would be just for one laugh at the end, and that was it, and they were out.
Right. Yeah, and it was, I'm pretty sure the show is about the same length. I mean, I think it was still 90 minutes, right? But it felt so long because they kept packing in skit after skit after skit after skit. And I'm thinking to myself, like, is this like a 3-hour show? But it was just, as you said, it was these shorter segments, so you would have your just little bit here. I mean, I watched Dave Chappelle's opening monologue a couple of weeks ago.
It was like half an hour.
It was, I know. It was by the time you got through the cold open and Dave Chappelle, I mean, you were practically the weekend update already.
Well, you get the musical guest. I always hate it when the musical guest comes on, because that means it's a slippery slope to the end.
Yep. Overall,
that crowd was more star-studded than the Oscars. There were more blue chip people at that. And the idea that Jack Nicholson came, Jack does not go out or do anything.
No.
And that was a get right there.
Yeah, it was really nice. And I had forgot the connection with Adam Sandler that they did the movie together about 20 years ago. But out of the blue, there's this older guy sitting there with the New York Yankees beret on. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a sec, is that Jack
It's
Nicholson?
Jack.
Jack was back, and the last time he made a public appearance was 2 years ago at a Lakers game for like a Lakers playoff game. He went with one of his sons, so he was there with one of his daughters. And I ended up seeing some photos from the New York Post. They got some of those paparazzi shots, and they showed him getting out of his car after the episode, kind of getting back to his hotel or wherever. And he had a cane, and he was kind of being helped with an assistant who had his arm around. So it was a little, you can understand why we haven't seen Jack for a few years, but
it was good. Brought it.
Yeah.
That's
really been the concern with him too. It's like, where has he been? Is he in really poor health? There was like, there were some really bad photos of him surfacing a couple years ago, eating like a hot dog on a boat, and you're like, oh man, is he morbidly obese, or did he go full on?
Is he crazy?
Right? Yeah, right. I know. It's like, where is he? But it was good to see. He looked like other than of course the photos with his walking, like he seemed to be in good health, good spirits, and it was just nice to have him there.
Yeah. Well, and I noticed that Cher moved at some point. Yeah. Cher was front and center, and I think she was near Kevin Costner. And then when they came to do a skit, she wasn't next to Kevin Costner. It was the one from Wednesday. And then Kevin Costner was part of a skit that was all about New York that was kind of mixing musicals with.
Right.
And so they must have moved people in and out. Now, the thing that has caused the most uproar this week about that show was Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, because she's suing the director of the film that she last did. And they thought, boy, they really had nerve showing up at this thing. And it's like, well, if they were invited, I guess they could show,
Right.
So, but they got a lot of attention out of the appearance, if you will.
John Mulaney brought up also there's been 900, but only 2 accused of murder. And then I was immediately trying to think, like, who was it? And I came up with OJ, and then I thought it was Robert Blake was the other.
It was.
Yeah.
But then, and who they also mentioned who was there?
Alec Baldwin. I like the opening with Paul Simon.
Miley was probably the best number. She had the best contemporary feel to the show. And then you brought Paul McCartney on at the end, and his voice was shot.
Yeah.
You let that go because it was just fun seeing him. The worst thing about the whole show was that they did not bring out the original cast members and just introduce them, if nothing else. And when you had to kind of pick them out of the crowd at the end and go, wait a minute. And you could see that Chevy was upset because the women were holding up Gilda's picture and it was covering him up. And maybe that was by choice. I don't know. But I would have liked to have seen those original ones that are still around there. And Dan Aykroyd didn't show.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there was some interesting I know Bill Hader wasn't there. It was nice, I think, with like Bill Murray during Weekend Update. It was fun doing that kind of top 10.
Mike Myers showing up as Linda Richman.
Right. Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah. That was one of those segments too, where when he came out, I was thinking, like, well, wait a second. He was Linda Richman, but he was somebody first. I'm like, what was that name? Paul Baldwin. And then he referenced Paul Baldwin because that was who it was originally. And then he shifted it into Linda Richman. Paul Simon with Sabrina Carpenter was a nice mix. The one thing I will say about the collab with Miley Cyrus and Brittany Howard with the Roots playing, so they're playing Nothing Compares to You. And it did wonder about that a little bit because it was a song that was performed by one of the most controversial singers ever to appear on the show with Sinead O'Connor.
But it wasn't the one that she ripped the picture up after.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where people start going, they jump a little too quickly.
Right. But it was an interesting selection because of the connection to Sinead, who obviously did not have a good ending to her time on SNL. But of course, too, that song was written by another legendary musician in Prince. Exactly.
I wonder if new viewers were interested in the show. I mean, as an old person, I loved every minute of it. I wanted to see more crowd shots so I could try and pick out who was there and who they were sitting with. It would have been nice. And I did sort of watch the the red carpet thing, but it was like, I know who they're going to pick. And I saw Whoopi Goldberg standing in the background waiting and waiting and waiting. I thought, she's going to get tired of waiting and they won't get her. That's what'll happen. No, I thought they did a good job. They went way over the time. They were supposed to be done in 3 hours. It was like more like 3.5 hours. But I'm okay with that.
I didn't get a chance to watch the red carpet at all. I did record it, and I'm gonna try to get back and watch some of it. I had to DVR the full episode, because I wasn't available that evening. So I've watched 2.5 hours of it. I think I have maybe the last hour to go.
So you missed the murder.
I did miss a little bit. Yeah, I missed some of it at the end, but I do want to go back and watch it. And the other thing that bummed me out, now I know they did the big concert. They did a big live concert. What was it, on Friday night?
Peacock.
But they also did another special, which I didn't know about, and it's on
Peacock
in demand, but it is on demand. So I started watching a little bit of it. They did kind of like a history of the music of SNL on Saturday, which I was totally unaware of. So I was a little disappointed. I caught a bit of it, a segment with Jack White performing and talking about it. So it was nice to see they brought some of the musicians back. The musicians talked about their performances there. So I want to go back and watch that full episode now and see, because it's such an amazing aspect of the show that it's not just a comedy show, but the performances on it. And when you talk to musicians, they'll say like what an amazing platform it is for them to perform on, because the acoustics in the studio are so good. They really like working there.
I didn't get to see that special, I must say, but they could have talked about the ones who were not so good at performing.
Yeah.
The ones who were auto-tuned, the ones that were lip syncing. Do I dare say that?
Right.
But that show, sorry, Peacock, that should have been on NBC. That's where it was birthed. That's where it belongs. That's where we need to see it, because that's how we access the whole show. Now, I'm assuming they'll bring it back at some Saturday night. We'll see the music special will be on because you asked for it. But I get what they're trying to do with Peacock, but sometimes the Peacock can come later.
I thought it was good, too, that they were willing to bring back some of those lesser casts.
Well, and again, they had, if you've watched anything on social media, they'll have like photos from SNL 50. And you go, who is that person? And they don't have name lines on them, and it kills you. Because I know that Denny Dillon was there. I know that some of those, Melanie Hutzel was there. Some of those, like Gary Kroger was there. But when you see the picture, you go, was this a producer? Was it a writer? Who is this guy?
Right.
And it was probably a cast member.
Yeah. I mean, it was nice to see like Julia Louis-Dreyfus there, who's of course well known, but you kind of forget that she was actually on SNL. I mean, you think of her more of Seinfeld and Veep and those shows, but really she got her big start on.
And it was a bad
SNL.
time, and I don't think she enjoyed it at all when she was there, but she met her husband there.
She did, yep.
So that had to be worth the wait. You know what I found odd is that some of the people that are big stars who came from Saturday Night Live looked pretty good. They looked, like maybe they've been keeping up with the work or whatever. And then you see the ones that we haven't seen in a long time, and you think, oh my God, they aged. And I think it's a lot of having that ability to keep in the hunt. And that's how they keep looking. Because Julia Louis-Dreyfus isn't that young, but she looked like $1 million. And then they got the premiere performance of Meryl Streep in this thing. Meryl Streep has never been on Saturday Night Live, and here she is doing a skit. They've got to put her on as a host. I think she would be perfect for this. And she did well with the one that she did do.
It was nice to see Lorraine Newman come back, too, and they gave her that extended skit of going into the studio and
with Chad,
right? And what I thought was interesting too, like what has she done? I mean, I don't really remember a lot of Lorraine Newman.
Now she's known as Hannah Einbinder's mother. That's her identity from Hacks.
Okay,
she's the mother of the young writer on that show. But yeah, she didn't do a lot of things. She wasn't like Jane Curtin went on and did sitcoms, and we saw her in Kate and Alley. We saw her in Third Rock from the Sun. You know, she's been around, but Lorraine took a different approach, I think, and probably spent a lot of time just being a mother. She was good. Again, why don't they bring some of those old people back as guests?
There are some things you wouldn't mind being stuck with, like a large unexpected inheritance. An always on the verge of death phone that has to be plugged in just right so it charges is not one of those things. Switch to Verizon and we'll pay off your old phone. Up to $800 via prepaid MasterCard so you can get a new one. Just trade in any phone from our top brands on any unlimited plan. With new line on My Plan. Additional terms apply for trade-in and pay off your phone offer. See Verizon.com for details.
On the show.
Right.
I know they brought, like Dana Carvey, who wasn't there, has been on all season long doing various sundry characters. And I thought for sure they would have done a Wayne and Garth. But if he wasn't there or if something was wrong, you know, maybe they thought that's he can't be there on that date. We'll get him earlier in the season. But I still want to see some of the old ones in the latter half of the season.
Yeah, it would have been nice to get a little bit more of that. And I know with some of the really early cast too, a lot of controversy around Chevy Chase because he's been known to be difficult to work with and other things. So, you know, they had to have him there, but maybe didn't want him to be front and center because of some of those.
And he seemed very pleasant when you saw him interact with people. There is one of those documentary episodes that's about that bad year, the year that they thought everybody was going to be fired. And some of those people showed to the thing. Terry Sweeney, for example, was there. And he had played Nancy Reagan in a number of skits that they did. But, you know, I would like to have been a reporter out front of that during the red carpet, just to grab these people and say, okay, now here's what I want to know from you, because I would have lots of questions, especially for the older cast members, because frankly, I grew up with them. They were what you watched. But I do remember watching when they showed the first episode, I remember not being impressed with it because it just was a little too hit and miss. And then it kind of found its groove. And that's almost now, it is too much in a groove where you get the open, you get probably a taped ad so they can change clothes, then you get a real skit, then you might get a commercial, you might get another skit, and then they start preparing for the musical guest. The musical guest comes on, and then you have a beer commercial, always usually a beer commercial, and then you have the news.
Right.
And then after the news, you get another skit that maybe wasn't as funny as the early ones. And then you get to the musical guest before maybe one more skit in the end of the night.
And sometimes with those late ones also, they've been known to, you know, they might have a live skit planned, something isn't quite right, and then they go to a skit that was taped during the dress rehearsal that they go to instead. So,
you know, they would put out a lot of those ones that never made air on like YouTube or something, and they don't do that anymore. And I'd like to see those. There should be an episode of skits that never made the air.
Right. Exactly.
And they've got them, so why not show them?
It was kind of funny in one of the segments when they were during the Q&A, right? And it's like, you know, here's a skit I worked on 20 years ago, or maybe we could work on it again. But they do a longer episode for rehearsals so they can figure out what works, what lands with the audience, and what doesn't.
When you get that many A-listers together, who really brings it? And it was Eddie Murphy. Clearly, Eddie Murphy, when he was doing a Tracy Morgan impression next to Tracy Morgan, that took a lot. And then when they had the Scared Straight Kids, you know, where he's got half his hair kind of hanging like buckwheat, and then the other half is like braided. He was so funny. I laughed. And then you bring in Will Ferrell, who is just as kind of dynamic and willing to go for it, and did. And so it's nice to see ones who probably didn't get to play together get that opportunity. And I'd like to see that mix more often. And the new kids, they seem to, you know, they brought it. I wish that they didn't do the Domingo thing, because I think
Yeah.
that Domingo thing, it's been done too often now in the last few weeks. And so
Right.
to do that for this, it wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
But it let a couple of them be in it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would have liked to have gotten maybe a few older sketches. I mean, obviously you didn't have Dana Carvey, so you couldn't do the Wayne's World. It was good to get Linda Richmond in there. I thought it was nice to have the Deep Thoughts of Jack Handy. That was kind of fun to get one of those. You didn't have Dan Aykroyd, so you couldn't get a Coneheads or something like that.
Sherry O'Terry was there. She was always as a cheerleader, as the Barbara Walters. I mean, she could have done a lot of little things, interstitial things in the show, but they didn't use her. And, you don't know why. It could be they're too busy. Maybe she's coming back at a later date. You never know. There were ones like that you're waiting for. And I think that's the sign of a good show, is that you want something, and then they've got another one that's going to take its place.
I would have liked to have seen Dennis Miller come back. I know with his politics, there is some questions like, well, it's such a liberal show, and he's obviously been more of a conservative, but I always really liked him as the Weekend Update host. It was nice to see him get ranked in the top 10 of Bill Murray's Weekend Update hosts. So they did give him a little nod. I don't know why he wasn't there. I know there was some controversy when they did one of these big, what was it, the 40th or the 45th? And he came on afterwards and said, actually, I was invited. I just didn't want to go. So hopefully that was sort of it too. I know some of these shows, you start getting into personalities and things like that. And I hope that you can put those things aside, and regardless of what your political beliefs are, because Victoria Jackson was another one who
she was there, and she did complain about Tom Hanks wearing a MAGA hat. And
right. It's like, I'm actually glad though that you're able to get people like that there and just be willing, hopefully put those types of things aside and
that
do the
says
show.
They all have common ground. The common ground is they were all on this show, and they all were through that kind of crucible that it takes to understand what works and what doesn't work. And they all got an opportunity to move on to a bigger career. I mean, you look at that cast of how many people were in the cast over how many years, and a lot of them did get good work.
We always see cast turnover, and sometimes it takes a season or two to kind of get their groove back. Like, you get so used to, and I think for me, I really had come to enjoy that cast that had Kate McKinnon on it and
Kristen Wiig.
Yeah, it was like a really good cast. And then they transitioned over largely to the group that's there now. I mean, other than Kenan Thompson, who's been there
forever,
it feels like, and like literally it is. I finally think, this cast, like even up until maybe a year ago, I wasn't loving it, but I feel like this season 50 cast has finally kind of come into its own, and I like it. And I don't know if it'll rank up there with one of the classic casts, like the original cast, or will it rank up with that cast of the early 90s when you had, Dana Carvey and Adam Sandler and that kind of crew, Mike Myers. But it feels like this is a pretty solid cast. Where do you fall on this group?
Yeah, I agree. I think they still have too many. They've got to cut some of them because they aren't getting work. Yeah. I still can't name some of the featured performers, and I do think that's where maybe either give them something more to do or cut them. It's just that way. It's funny how do you remember Mad TV? Yeah. How that was a kind of a breeding ground. In Living Color was another one. So Saturday Night Live did set the tone for these kinds of shows, and they did give birth to other kinds of comedy, but it's the only one that's lasted. And it must be very expensive and very difficult to do, and casting must be hard. I knew she's been on for a while, but Ego Odom, I love her. And when she does Lisa from Temecula, I want to see that thing. I'll watch it over and over and over because she's so good at playing those. And doesn't she do Dionne Warwick too? So
yeah, I think so. Yep.
She has that ability. What they have changed is that they don't do as many celebrity impersonations. They used to do that a lot more. And so would come. Look at how Chevy Chase was like, even though he did nothing to be like him, he did Gerald Ford. And so
right.
they're not doing celebrity kind of spoofs. And I think that's something they could bring back. There's easily an opportunity here and there for them to do those kinds instead of always creating a character where you go,
Yeah.
okay. And it was good to have Drunk Uncle and the Drunk Girlfriend. Those were fun to see.
Right. Yeah. It was nice to see them back. I think like on this current cast, you've got about 15 repertory players, and that is a lot of
Too many.
folks. It is. And then there's only 3 featured players. And I feel like we see a lot of Ashley Padilla and Emil Joaquin, but Jane Wickline, she barely shows up, but she's had a few of the more notable occurrences when she's done her little weekend update songs. But
that's where
other than that,
that's a showcase for them. And if
Yeah.
they can do a little something in that segment, then they might get a little traction, but some don't.
When you look at some of the performers over the years, the ones that can kind of transform themselves into something else, and I see like a Sarah Sherman right now as someone who she could put on a wig and be somebody totally different. And I also, like Kenan Thompson, who's been on it forever, this season it feels like he's hardly there. He kind of shows up once in a while. It's almost like he's maybe moved into that Phil Hartman role where he's just there as your ultimate person to slide into whatever.
When they need you to help bail out something,
Yep.
and they know he can bring it and bring the timing with it. Another one like that is Mikey Day. Mikey Day gets a lot of attention as maybe the dad or maybe the newscaster or something that might require nothing, but they can add a little more to it so that it has a little more humor. It's surprising how these regulars on the show or cast members, they'll disappear for 3-4 weeks at a time. And you think, do they get another job? Are they doing something there? Or is it their skits don't work?
Right.
And funny that they don't throw some of those ones. Because I think now this year, because he's been doing a lot of stuff for Wicked, Bowen Yang, it really isn't in the show, but they'll stick him in one skit just to say he's there.
Yeah.
And he used to be real good at creating oddball things like the iceberg and, where you go, what was that?
Mm-hmm.
They need to use him more.
Well, it's been quite the week with SNL 50.
Will we make it to the 100?
I don't know. It is kind of interesting because a lot of folks thought that this might be season 50 might be it, but it feels like too strong of a cast to go out on. Lorne Michaels seems to like what he's doing.
How did they pay those people? This is what I want to know. Did you have to bring your own outfit to wear to sit in the audience? Or did they have a stylist make sure you got an outfit? Did they pay you if you had a line to say? Or was that considered a donation to something? Who paid for the party afterwards? Or was there a party? Those are just dumb questions that you wonder when you see that many in the whole show. But yeah, it's fascinating. Another thing I want to talk about, if I can, Companion, the movie Companion, 18 days is all it took from it to be in theaters to now being streaming and online and available for sale. 18 days, that's way too short, and they're going to kill theaters if they don't do something about this. Because if you'd only have to wait 18 days to see something that you were kind of on the fence about, no. And I think there really should be like a 6-month moratorium on putting movies into that kind of arena, just so that you do go back to the theater to see them, because it is a different experience.
Yeah.
I also was watching some of those made for streaming movies this last weekend. Kind of Pregnant, the Bridget Jones one. And I think, what determines that? What determines that this should go direct to streaming? Because some of them are just as bad as the movies you'll see in the theater. Why wouldn't Amy Schumer draw a crowd at the movie theater? So that's a big question that needs to be solved, is how soon can we release these to other kinds of exposure? And is it going to kill the business, or is it going to still be there?
I generally go to an AMC theater because there's one right in town. So it's, just like a 2-minute drive for me. But it's one of the older AMCs. So it doesn't have the fancy recliners. It doesn't have an IMAX or anything like that. But they're going to be introducing a thing soon where for $15 a month, you can see 4 movies. And my wife and I were talking about it because from like a deal standpoint, that's a great deal, to go
Sure.
4 movies for $15.
Bring your bucket.
Bring the bucket, but I don't know what we would see. Like, what are we going to go see? It's almost like we're going to just see whatever movie's there just for the sake of seeing something, because there's not, in our opinion, there isn't 4 good movies at any time now, like other than the Christmas and now July
the Oscar
4th.
bait.
Right.
Yeah. But there are some indies I wish they would start showing in those venues because we want to see the pictures, but how do you find them?
It sounds like a great idea. I'm just thinking for $15 a month, what am I going to go see in March?
Because if it were opening weekend, you could go to it, then I'd do it.
Yeah.
But if it's like you have to wait till it runs a week, then you can come to it. I don't think I want to go.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap this episode, but we're going to be back next week
with Oscar predictions. It is up in the air right now, up in the air.
So make sure you tune in again next week for another episode of Streamed and Screened.